Hello.
Hi.
Oh my gosh.
Hi.
Stop. Hello. Okay, Alyson here today, and I have
Me.
Dr. Peterson.
I'm
He's
Jon.
back.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for coming back and being with us on our podcast. We had our podcast launch, and that was very exciting.
Today, yeah, it was fun.
Today, the day that we're recording this is the day we launched our first 4 episodes of the Health Revolution podcast. I hope everyone's enjoying it.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I hope it's helpful.
At least, and maybe it just gives them something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, we're in a constant state of learning more about our mental and physical health, and we just want to share what we're learning with our audience, because we just believe this work is so important. We run a program called Fat to Fuel. And we wanted to talk about that today because a lot of the questions we get in that program are about eating fat, and specifically, does eating fat make you fat? Okay, so Jon is with me today. He and I have been studying about this a lot. Jon, tell us a little bit about your story. You were overweight a lot of your life.
Yeah, I was probably 70 pounds overweight the last time that I tried to lose weight, and actually succeeded. But I mean, I would say that, my entire life has been very much like a yo-yo. So I would gain weight, and then I would try to lose some weight, and then I would ratchet up and gain more weight, and then lose a little bit of weight, and then gain even more weight and lose a little bit of weight. And eventually I found myself at about 305 pounds.
Yeah, and you always had those jeans in the closet. Oh yeah, these are my jeans at this weight, and these are my jeans at that weight.
Do you guys do that? Like, I've got these piles. Okay, these are my 36s, these are my 38s, these are my 40s, to where then when I lose the weight, then I can go and fit back into my jeans again, which is always wishful thinking. And then eventually I'd throw out the smallest fitting jeans, because that's a pipe dream, and then I'd buy one size larger.
And then you get rid of the larger size because you said, I'm never going to be that size again.
And then I'm back buying brand new jeans again.
Oh, so it's been a vicious cycle. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that sort of thing. For myself, I gained weight, during pregnancies. I have 4 babies. But after the last one, I feel like I just gained and it never came off. And that was very challenging.
You of course, always look beautiful.
Oh, you're so... That's the right answer. There was no question, but thank you for giving that answer. Okay, so fat to fuel. One of the biggest questions we get: does eating? People always say, I've always heard that eating fat makes you fat, and we're here to dispel some very common myths today. I think that's what this is all about. Some common myths about eating fat.
And we're going to do that in hopes not to create a conspiracy theory while that's going on, because you could certainly, theorize about this and, blame and demonize the government for what has happened. But, in reality, it's us not listening to our own bodies and our own needs that have caused this epidemic throughout the nation of having 1 out of 3 people being overweight.
Right. So I think when we're talking about eating fat, a lot of people think like that's going to go straight to my arteries or straight to my thighs or something. And we're talking about your body, when you eat fat, uses fat as an energy source, and as opposed to storing fat on your body. When you store fat on your body, that's what creates the clogged arteries, the weight gain, the inflammation, the heart disease.
And we'll talk a little bit about how that occurs today.
Okay, so let's talk about why we've been told our whole lives to eat low fat. I mean, there was a huge trend.
Oh, huge. Yeah. It all started like somewhere around 1977.
Yeah. In the 70s, where we were told, think about the margarine, that we were told to eat margarine. That was a big deal. Now we know margarine is very bad for us.
Oh yeah. That's the worst fat you can eat.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that history of that.
So, back in the day, what they were noticing is in the United States alone, they were noticing an uptick in heart attacks in our nation. And there was a scientist that the government then paid for his research, and his conclusion was that our increase in fat in our diets is causing heart disease, and it's causing heart disease by clogging up our arteries, by causing our livers to be fat, and caking up our whole circulatory system. Okay.
You got stuck a little bit there. Circulatory system. Right. And so the government
came out with dietary guidelines.
Right. Who are not nutritionists. But they saw an epidemic, and they hired a nutritionist, and this one nutritionist came up with this idea, this philosophy of his, and then they came out with the nutrition guidelines that we need to eat a high carb, low fat diet.
Yeah, so he suggested actually lowering our fat intake by almost 40%, and then upping our carbohydrate intake. And that by doing so, then we would reduce the risk of heart disease.
I think it's also important to note that the GDP also was in favor of this, because what is our gross domestic product? Corn, wheat, right? These are things that are easily grown here. So it's very easy to feed the population on those kinds of things. And so therefore, I think when they found a nutritionist that corresponded with
their economic model.
Yes. Then hey, there we go. Let's feed the people more carbs, more corn, more wheat.
Yep. And then over time, this was refuted time and time again. But, as an example, think about when we just went through COVID. Everybody experienced, going through COVID and the guidelines that came out. And we aren't going to mention any names, but, somebody who started with F and ended with ouchie, created some absolutely ridiculous guidelines and things that we should be doing. And now, as we go back retrospectively and we look at those, we find out how damaging that they really were.
Yeah, we're suffering a lot of the consequences of the recommendations at that time. And, that's debatable for a lot of people, but we can just see that when the government at that time relied solely on one person to give us all of our information, that wasn't necessarily the best for the community at large. And we are still suffering some very severe consequences of those restrictions and guidelines that were put out. So
and they stick around forever.
They do.
We're still stuck in the traditions of COVID, a few years afterwards, but we're stuck in the tradition of high carbohydrate intake from a bad decision made back in the 70s.
Yeah. So what they've discovered over time is that you look at the wealthier nations, they're the ones that have more heart disease and cardiovascular disease and obesity. And the nations that aren't as wealthy do not. And so they're studying why that is. And the thing they've come up with is there is a direct correlation, not with fat necessarily, but with processed foods, sugar, those refined carbs. And that is what is causing the heart disease, the obesity, the inflammation.
Correct. And that's where they got it wrong. They were looking at the countries based off of what they were eating, and not necessarily, the wealth of the country and the types of things that were available. So, for instance, really low heart disease in Japan. And what is their largest staple on the table? Rice. But it's low in meat, but they had low heart attacks. And so, this scientist from 1977 took that information as, well, if we increase the carbohydrates, then obviously we're going to decrease heart disease. And so he got that wrong.
And what we've discovered with the keto diet, the ketosis diet, the one that we promote in our Fat to Fuel program, is that carbohydrates that are healthy, let's say I've heard quinoa is very healthy, healthy grain. We're not saying it's not.
Oh, no.
But when you have the presence of that with fat, with high fat, with processed food, with excess amounts of protein, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yep. Big time. And that's when cholesterol intake becomes a problem.
Yeah, so that was the next question that I get a lot of when people hear that we've been on the keto diet for over a year now. They say, well, doesn't that affect your cholesterol levels? And the great news is it absolutely helps your bad cholesterol. Jon had his blood work taken a few years ago, and then he just took it recently. And tell us about your results.
So, in cholesterol, we tend to grade things as LDL and HDL in our blood work. So that's your low density lipoprotein and high density lipoproteins. And we find that a high density lipoprotein is associated with health versus if you're high in LDLs, that increases your risk of heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. And so my LDLs were very high, my HDLs were quite low. But that's because I was on a high carbohydrate diet. The moment that I switched that up, my cholesterol actually increased a little bit, but that's not a problem. I have high HDL and now my LDLs are quite low. It just completely switched. And so now my risk for heart disease is much lower if you look at it on paper.
Okay, so eating cholesterol
is not a bad thing.
Right. So we've heard that a lot too. Like, don't eat eggs. Eggs have been a debate for, I don't know, decades now. Do you eat eggs? Do you not eat eggs? But the reason we've been told not to eat eggs is because that has cholesterol in it. But that's dietary cholesterol, which we now realize does not increase your bad cholesterol in your body.
No, and the government is right from that standpoint. If we eat the way the government asks us to and have a high carbohydrate diet, any cholesterol is a bad thing. Because what we find out is if we have the presence of carbohydrates and sugars in our system, what happens is we create too many triglycerides. And then that floats around the bloodstream. And eventually that turns into cholesterol. And that then cakes up the liver. That then cakes up the arteries.
Yeah, that's the other question I get a lot of. Is eating high fat going to clog your arteries? Is eating high fat going to cause fatty liver? And when we say the keto diet, not everybody might be familiar with it, but it is a 75% fat. If you're looking at your macronutrients, 75% of your diet is fat. 20% is protein and 5% of your diet is carbs. So when we're saying a high fat diet, we're referring to high fat, low carb diet. I want to be specific in that because if you have a high fat diet and you're having carbs, yeah, you will get the clogged arteries, the fatty liver. But when we're talking about high fat, low carb, very low carb, 5% carb, then talk about that, about clogging your arteries and fatty liver for us.
So first off, now all keto diets are not built the same. There's several different versions of a ketogenic diet, but the whole premise is high fat, low carb. And so, the percentages of what we are eating can vary. But when we're having a high carbohydrate diet, basically the gist is if you're consuming carbs and you're consuming fat, you're in danger.
Okay, so it won't clog your arteries if you're eating a lot of fat?
No, it will not. No, fat clogs your arteries in the presence of high carbohydrates, period. So if you do not have high sugars and high carbohydrates in your diet, fats are nothing more but a fuel.
Right. And so when you think about, I use this analogy with people is like, when you want to fatten up an animal, I mean, we're animals, as humans are animals.
Yeah,
but if you think about the animals on the farm, like I'm going to fatten up this duck for Thanksgiving dinner or whatever it is.
Or corn-fed beef. It increases the fat content.
You feed them corn, right?
Feed them corn.
Corn and grains and all that sort of thing.
So we had this kind of funny discussion about fatty liver because, that's one of the things on a high carbohydrate diet that can occur. Is that we can get this fatty liver. Now, in the culinary field, we could look at one of my least favorite foods, and I am a foodie, but I do hate foie gras. Absolutely hate it.
Tell us what foie gras is.
Foie gras basically is a fattened duck liver.
Okay.
And when we look at French cooking and whatnot, they use a lot of foie gras, and I can't stand the taste of it. But it's interesting how it's actually produced. How it's produced is by force feeding ducks high amounts of corn. So they'll actually syringe feed these ducks down their throats way too many calories, and specifically way too many carbohydrates. And then as a result of that, their liver fattens up to the point to where some people might find that delicious. But what we know about fatty liver is it increases our risk for cirrhosis, number one. And you can get a cirrhotic liver, which is really dangerous for us because that increases our risk for diabetes, heart attack, and stroke.
I've always thought that fatty liver was because you're drinking alcohol.
No, it's not. Okay. You can have non-alcoholic fatty liver just by consuming too many carbohydrates.
Wow.
And you think about how inflammatory that is to the body.
Right. So when we talk about carbs, I think it's a lot of times for us synonymous with sugar, correct?
Well, it's the body takes carbs, whether it's oatmeal or whether it's, a banana. Mm-hmm. or any type of fruit or just refined table sugar. And it breaks it down to one source, and that's glucose.
Okay, glucose. And tell us what glucose is. And
glucose in essence is the purest form of sugar that our body will use then to convert it to energy.
Okay, so we have like high glucose levels, or people are monitoring their glucose levels. What does that mean?
So that means that free floating sugars in your bloodstream at the time.
Okay.
And your body wants to maintain an equilibrium of the amount of sugar that it has in its system, especially when you're eating a high sugar diet or a sugar-based diet at all, or carbohydrate-based diet. And it does that by fluctuating the insulin levels and your glucagon levels from your pancreas.
Yeah. So when we were just talking to our kids about this last night, actually, because do you guys do this? We feed our kids dinner every night. And then by the time
I hate feeding our kids dinner.
Of course, that's not the part I'm complaining about, feeding kids dinner. I'm complaining about the 2 hours later when it's time for bed and they're like, I can't go to bed. I'm hungry. And what do they want? They don't want dinner. I'm like, well, here's your dinner that you didn't eat. Or
they want cereal.
No, they want cereal. They want a banana. They want applesauce.
It feels good on their brain.
Yeah. So we were just telling them last night, because our youngest daughter opted for a banana. She needed a banana, so she thought, to go to sleep. So we gave her a banana and she asked for another banana. I said, no, you know what? That's a lot of sugar right before bed. And it's just a lot of sugar in general. I think one banana a day is good. And she said, bananas have sugar? And I said, yeah, actually a banana has as much sugar as some candy bars. And she was so surprised with that. But then you were explaining the nutrient difference.
Yeah, and there is. I mean, from food to food, yes, a Snickers bar contains the same amount of sugar as a banana does. But, the banana then carries also other vital nutrients along with it. So it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. But if you're on a ketogenic diet, that's not something that's your primary food source.
Right. So if you're having, like, for instance, the banana, but you're combining it with a lot of cream or ice cream or something fatty with it, or fried bananas. Oh, that used to be one of my favorites, like a banana wrapped in dough and fried. That is going to be very harmful for the liver.
Yeah.
And for all the fat gaining and inflammation and everything like that.
What's interesting last night, though, is I chose to take her banana and actually make a milkshake out of it.
Yeah.
Now, what happened with that was interesting because usually this little girl would pound a banana and ask for a second.
Right.
But as soon as I mixed that banana with a little bit of fat in it, and there was no other sugars, it was just the banana and some whipped cream and some ice. She ate a quarter of what she normally would. And she's like, I'm full. I'm going to go to bed.
She was full. So I actually wanted to talk about that with the fat burning diet. So when you're in ketosis, and we help you get there with the Fat to Fuel program again, and we'll teach you all the things of how to do it, what to eat, and how to manage your feelings around food, because that really is what it is. We eat emotionally so many times. But when you're burning fat and you're eating fat for fuel, you are so full. I find that I have to sometimes force myself to eat because I'm just full. I don't crave carbs.
No.
I don't want carbs. You crave the energy source that you're burning. So when you're burning fat, you crave fat.
So like this morning, I mean, it's like I did an intermittent fasting this morning, and I broke my fast at I don't know what time, about 11 o'clock, just a little bit ago. And you know, in the past, it was okay. I'm going to have a bowl of cereal, and when I'm done with that bowl of cereal, I'm going to have another bowl of cereal, and now I'm full. And
Right.
you know, that's now 1,000 calories that I probably downed,
Oh,
just
goodness.
trying to get full and satisfy my emotions. But this morning when I broke my fast, it was 3 fried eggs, fried in avocado oil.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had a hard time just finishing that because it was so filling.
Fat is so filling, and it's such a great energy source because it keeps your blood sugar that we were talking about, that blood sugar low,
Yep.
so that you can actually start accessing. When your blood sugar is low, that's when you can access the fat stores on your body.
Yep.
So that's why people do the intermittent fasting, because your blood sugar goes low and then you can start burning fat. But we combine that with the keto diet, and it's a real recipe for success there.
Mm-hmm.
So just before we go today, just some of the benefits of the keto diet. We've talked about some of them. Losing weight is one of the big ones.
And you can lose weight. I mean, the whole idea with losing weight, I think, is to decrease inflammation in the body.
Yes. When you have excess weight on your body is naturally inflamed. So,
and when it's inflamed, it mismanages its energy sources.
Yeah. And if you guys are interested, we just did a podcast, I think it was episode 2, that was what's wrong with chronic inflammation, or something about chronic inflammation. So go check that out as well. So,
brain fog.
Alzheimer's patients do great on the keto diet.
Actually, some improve.
Yeah, some reverse their symptoms on the keto diet. That's one of the benefits our clients love, is that their brain is more clear. They feel like they have more energy, like more sustainable energy. Why is that? Because you don't have the highs and lows from when you're burning sugar / carbs. You don't have the high energy, then the low energy, and you're not always constantly trying to balance that out.
And if you want to see a very interesting graph, go look up what happened across the years when we started decreasing fat content, and about how often Alzheimer's actually peaked up and was diagnosed.
Yeah, the other graph we were just looking at too was a decrease in fat, because the government had told us to stop eating fat in the 70s. And what happened was an immediate spike in
obesity,
heart disease, a spike in increased calories, increased carbs, and increased obesity and heart disease. But that was all actually opposing the chart where the line for burning fat, the fat burning line, was going down. So people were eating less fat,
but they
more
were getting
carbs,
fatter,
more calories, increasing their weight, and having heart disease. Very interesting graph. We can put
the
that.
fact is we just are not meant to be carbohydrate burners.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an anti-inflammatory diet out there that is carb burning, the Mediterranean diet, which I haven't been on myself, but I've heard has excellent benefits.
Sure.
The problem I see with that is, like we were saying, most of us are emotional eaters. And so when you are burning carbs, so the Mediterranean diet, for instance, is a good, healthy balance of carbs.
I love the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah,
it's delicious.
But when you're burning carbs, your body is seeking carbs. Your brain is seeking carbs. And that's what's the problem, because your brain starts going, I need carbs for energy. And then when you get a little bit too hungry, you start looking at all carbs as being the same. So like a banana is the same as a banana milkshake, is the same as a donut. And they all start becoming very hard to manage our
And the brain doesn't know the
that.
difference.
Yeah.
The brain doesn't. The brain just sees everything as sugar. And so it's going to pick the sugar that makes it feel the best.
Yeah, it's the easiest, that feels the best. And
so it goes for the crack cocaine of sweet, pretty much.
So I just noticed when I'm in ketosis and I'm burning fat, I'm craving fat. Fat isn't really fun. Like, it's not fun to eat fat without all the carbs. So it's just like, I just eat it because food is fuel and I need to fuel my body.
Mhm.
And this is how I'm fueling my body. And it's as simple as that. And it's not very complicated with what carb should I eat or not eat or anything. There's no drama.
It's like a difference of a relationship of food.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're eating a carb-based diet, you're almost, you're having an abusive relationship with sugar because it's not benefiting our bodies at all.
Yeah.
And we just want more of it versus this functional relationship of eating food because I need to fuel my body so I can go do amazing things.
In another episode, I would love to talk about what ketosis actually does when we're burning ketones and how to get into ketosis and all of that. So be looking for that if you're interested in more information. Also, our program is in the show notes. If you click that Fat to Fuel link, if you want more information, we can send that to you.
You bet.
And we're here for you. If you have questions or anything like that, we're here to help. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks, Dr. Peterson, Jon, for coming. It's always a pleasure having you on the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you found value in what you heard today. If so, please follow us and go give us that 5-star rating. It really helps us reach more people that need to hear this message. Also, if you're ready to make changes to your health and well-being, go check out our Fat to Fuel program. Our coaching program empowers you to make healthy changes to your life one step at a time. Go to fattofuel.com or click the link in the show notes. We hope to see you there.